have the pleasure in this context of building our partnership and working relationship with the London Stock Exchange Group, represented by Ibukun. Can just allow him to maybe say a few words about the LSE Group's outlook and perspective on the opportunities in Eastern Africa and the wider African continent. Thank you.
It's a delight to be here for many reasons. Number one, we are here to meet with some of the corporates that we have been working with over many years that are based here in Kenya, but also to work very closely with the Nairobi Stock Securities Exchange and with the CMA and some of the partners that we have here for today's event, which we think will be a landmark event in terms of opening up the opportunities of bringing and linking the capital pools of London with the capital pools here in Nairobi. The London Stock Exchange has a deep history of looking at partnerships and collaborations across Africa, creating and generating greater capital raising opportunities for businesses on both sides of the spectrum. And what we aim to do is to create greater, closer ties and collaboration, in particular in areas of policy and regulation, and indeed in terms of bringing direct capital to Nairobi. The London Stock Exchange currently has 120 African companies listed on the exchange with a combined market capitalization of about $260 billion. There are lots of opportunities for those companies to come and list here in Kenya, particularly given the integration plans, the regional plans that are happening here. It'll be an essential part of those companies' strategy moving forward, and we hope to bring those opportunities as close as possible to the exchange here, working close cooperation with other organizations as well.
We are generally playing host to the conference and are extremely happy to have extended an invitation to a wide range of market players, corporates, and individuals who we believe in the near future will be taking action and taking advantage of the senior presence that we see from the NSC, from the CMA, from Stevenson Howard, the London Stock Exchange, to be able to actually access the international markets and tap into that additional liquidity. In addition to that, we see another simple role, which is preparing these companies to go there. So whatever actions they need to take in advance of listings, we would be and are actually prepared to undertake those services.
We've spent many years helping African companies and Africa-focused companies raise finance, both off-market but also through stock exchanges. And we're particularly excited about the opportunities both within Kenya and regionally. We're crucially aware of the need for capital, and we see the dual listing opportunity as a great way of bringing capital into Kenya for much needed projects, and also encouraging more domestic investment into listed Kenyan companies. It won't be a silver bullet, but we think it's part of a wide range of options for encouraging reinvestment of Kenyan capital and also an inflow of foreign capital into Kenya. Thank you.
I think this is just really re-emphasizing the fact that this is one of the components of the delivery of the 10-year Capital Markets Master Plan that has been rolled out by the industry in Kenya. As you can see, we're very conscious as the authority that the effective implementation of that is going to rely very heavily on, one, effective industry participation, but two, creating the right partnerships so that we can really present and place Kenya on the right context, in the right framework, vis-a-vis moving forward in our transition to become the heart of African capital markets, as well as an effective international financial center. You look at the operating environment we have in the country. We are conscious that ultimately a decision to do a dual listing is very much a corporate decision on where they want to access their capital. But our role as the Capital Markets Authority is really to see how we can facilitate and create the right kind of environment so there can be transparency. At the core of facilitating a move towards dual listing into much more developed markets is also the recent work we've been doing on corporate governance reform. to make sure that the companies we have operating in our country are also at a level of transparency, accountability, and effectiveness that they'll be able to access those international markets in a much more transparent and fast-tracked process, because I think there's been a conscious realization that corporate governance is really one of the largest challenges to companies being able to access global markets. So we are working very consistently to really make sure that the corporate governance environment in the country is sufficiently robust, that we're operating at international standards, and then it's more of a commercial or corporate decision as to which markets they want to raise their capital from.
The London Stock Exchange is very much a complementary financing option for those companies. If a company is purely domestic in its business and its outlook, then it should use the local stock exchange, use local sources of finance. Where a listing overseas becomes relevant is when a company and its business plan is an international one, whereas expanding beyond the borders of Kenya, beyond the borders of the East African community and into international markets, that's when you have complementarity working at its best. So that's where the London Stock Exchange fits in, and its focus of international capital on international stories will help Kenyan companies moving forward. In terms of the types of companies that can come, it's large and small. There are markets in London which can cater to all of those different types of companies and their corporate requirements, their governance standards, their accounting standards. So we have, for example, the main market in London where you'd expect to find many of the blue chip corporates, but we also have a small cap market called the AIM market, which is very similar to the GEMS market that was launched here in Nairobi very, very recently. And maybe Tony can give you a little bit more detail in terms of if a company wants to come, what sort of things it would need to have in place in order to do that.
A lot of the requirements for companies to come to market in London will be familiar to corporates who are looking at the requirements here in Nairobi. The devil, as always, is in the detail. And so when you look at some of the eligibility requirements, so the requirements for levels of free floats and so on, the picture is slightly different. But in broad terms, it will be very familiar. It's the same picture when you look at continuing obligations after the initial IPO. And there are subtle differences. There may be slight differences in terms of timing and level of disclosure of information. But by way of example, in London, IFRS is the accounting standard that's required, and that is the accounting standard here.
We find, obviously, as Ibukun mentioned, that companies fit in different segments of the London Stock Exchange. But what's important, really, before they go there, is the preparation work that they've done here to prepare themselves for greater scrutiny, for enhanced corporate governance, and what we as a firm are trying to do is to really cement and drill into them through advisory work that begins pre-listing on what would make your company effective, attractive, in order to be able to attract this international capital. And part of that is the reason why we feel this forum is extremely important.
There is already a very good working relationship between Kenya and the UK in capital markets. So we have a London Stock Exchange company which provides trading technology to the Nairobi Securities Exchange. We also have a FTSE, which is a London Stock Exchange company, which also is an index provider also in Kenya. So everything that we are doing today is really about how to enhance those initial relationships into something of greater magnitude for Kenyan companies. And in terms of London's investment pool that Paul mentioned, it's currently about $1.9 trillion invested into international companies out of London. That's singly the largest pool anywhere. As Paul mentioned, New York's entire pool is greater, but the focus on international companies in London is very, very strong. And what we want to do is to bring more of that capital to Kenya to fund Kenya's financing plans across all verticals and all major opportunities.